year, and this is a broad coalition of leaders who are here this morning to talk about this variety of issues. And I'd like to first introduce Gretchen Raffa, who's going to explain this coalition that has come together from Planned Parenthood, and then we'll hear from our great Lieutenant Governor, Susan Bysiewicz.
Thank you all. We appreciate you being here today. My name is Gretchen Raffa, Director of Public Policy and Advocacy for Planned Parenthood of Southern New England and the lead coordinator for the Connecticut Coalition for Choice. We are so pleased and honored to be here with our constitutional officers, our legislative allies, and community members and coalition partners to celebrate the 46th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, the landmark Supreme Court case that protects the constitutional right to safe legal abortion. Under the Trump-Pence administration, and with Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, reproductive health care, including access to safe legal abortion, faces its greatest threat. Let's be clear, when politicians attack healthcare, they disproportionately impact people of color, women, the LGBTQ community, and young people. We must continue to work to ensure access to healthcare does not depend on who you are, where you live, or how much money you make. Due to racism and discriminatory public policy, people of color and people with low income are less likely to have access to health care and health insurance, resulting in major health disparities in our country. We're committed to working together with our partners on passing policies that address these barriers in order to ensure every person can access the health care they want and need. We saw a clear mandate from voters in the 2018 midterms. They want more access to health care and policies that protect their rights and freedoms. Voters did their jobs at the polls, and now we're looking to put their will into action during this session and beyond to ensure that everyone can have access to their fundamental human right to health care. In Connecticut, we have a long, proud history of protecting reproductive rights and with a strong bipartisan effort in the General Assembly. Last year, both parties worked together to pass proactive policy to ensure that regardless of action taken in Washington, D.C., the Affordable Care Act's 10 essential benefits and women's preventative health care is covered and protected in our state. We are grateful to have so many legislative champions here today with us from both sides of the aisle, and we will continue to work to support policies to advance reproductive health and rights and support women and families' economic security. This legislative session poses an unprecedented opportunity to continue to work to protect the rights and freedoms of people in our state and continue to demonstrate our leadership, Connecticut's leadership in the reproductive freedom movement. Our coalition will continue to fight to protect access to health care for all people and ensure our communities have what they need to live healthy and self-determined lives. We won't stop fighting for bodily autonomy in a world where abortion is understood as a basic human right, an essential part of healthcare. We have more work to do in Connecticut, and we're truly looking forward to working this session with our allies in the legislature and the administration. I'd like to turn it over to our Lieutenant Governor, Susan Bysiewicz.
Gretchen, thank you so much for your leadership. I am very proud to be here with a bipartisan group of colleagues from Constitutional Office and the legislature, and I'm very happy to be here on behalf of not just myself, but also Governor Lamont to help celebrate the 46th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. Connecticut has an amazing and proud history of supporting Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade came about because of Griswold v. Connecticut, a case that Catherine Rohrabaugh argued for Planned Parenthood of New Haven that provided the underpinnings on which Roe v. Wade was based. And in the early 1990s, we actually codified a Roe v. Wade law into our state statutes. But even though we have that protection in our state statute, and even though we currently have a Roe v. Wade in our Supreme Court case law, both things are under attack every day, right here in our legislature and in Washington, D.C. We have to be vigilant and fight against those attacks and work to expand women's reproductive health care access and women's reproductive freedom, because these things are essential for the economic power of women and families in our state. And it's also very important that in addition, we work to advance the cause of women and girls and economic equality in our state by fighting for paid family medical leave, raising our minimum wage to $15 an hour, and ensuring equal pay. And the governor and I were very proud to announce on Friday that we have established a council on women and girls, and all of our commissioners and our constitutional officers and representatives from our legislature in both parties will be working together to make sure that women have reproductive health care and freedom and economic equality. I thank you so much for having me here today, and I look forward to working in a bipartisan way with our elected officials. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Bysowitz, and I know that all of us in the legislature are grateful to have you and Governor Lamont as partners on these really important issues, so thank you very much. Next, we will hear from State Senator Marilyn Moore.
Thank you. I'm so happy to see so many people on both sides of the aisle here to celebrate Roe versus Wade. People of color tend to suffer the highest disparities in health, and black maternal health is one of those areas that they suffer. And that's why I'll be introducing Senate Bill 56, an act concerning doula services under Medicaid program. So I learned this morning from one of my colleagues, they did not know what a doula was until they had a child. And a doula is a professional trained person in childbirth who provides emotional, physical, and educational support to a mother who's expecting, who's experiencing labor, and who is giving birth. A doula's purpose is to help have a safe, memorable, and empowering birthing experience. Studies have shown that it improves the quality of care by making it more accessible, safe for women, and family-centered delivery. It improves health outcomes for mothers and babies, and reduces spending on non-beneficial medical procedures, avoidable complications, and preventable chronic conditions. This is just one step toward health equity that the state of Connecticut needs to take. I hope you'll all stand with me and my colleagues as we push for a country and a state where no matter what your zip code is, or your color, or your skin, you can count on quality, affordable, and accessible health care. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moore. Next, we will hear from Representative Liz Lenahan.
Thank you very much. I'm Liz Linehan. I represent the 103rd District, which is Cheshire, Southington, and Wallingford. I'm thrilled to join my colleagues and women's advocates here to commemorate the 46th anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision. It's a crucial landmark in women's health in the United States. And while Connecticut remains committed to protecting the right to safe women's health care, we must also protect the privacy and safety of women when they make such health care decisions. And to that end, I am proud to have introduced a bill to protect the confidentiality of patients by allowing an opt-out form from information relating to sensitive healthcare procedures on the explanation of benefits paperwork. There are times when an individual needs to access coverage on their insurance plan, but feel that they cannot because the main policyholder would find out through the explanation of benefits paperwork sent to their home. This legislation will protect patient privacy in the event that they are possibly in an abusive relationship, shielding an abusive partner from being notified that an individual has accessed birth control, abortion, even mental health services, and other sensitive information. I look forward to wonderful support from my colleagues. I'm thrilled that we have bipartisan support here, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you because all of you are important to protecting these vital healthcare services. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Lenahan. And now I'd like to introduce Representative Terry Wood.
Thank you, May, and thank you to you all for being here and all the good words that have been spoken. I remember when Roe v. Wade was passed, when the Supreme Court made the decision, and it was landmark, and it continues to be a landmark we need to protect. There are so many of us, both sides of the aisle, that protect women's reproductive rights, and I'm very happy to be here today to support a couple of bills in particular that will protect women's maternal health. And yes, doula and douala, I think there are a couple different ways to say it, and I knew exactly what it was. Pregnancy prevention, CPCs. It's not right that these centers, there are about 25, 26 throughout the state, and they are deceptive in how they advertise their services. So we need to stop that. We need women to know the truth. So thank you again for being here, and look forward to the session and protecting these freedoms. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wood, and next we will hear from Representative Caroline Simmons, and as she comes up, I'll just take a moment and do my best to introduce all of the legislators that are up here this morning, and I'm going to do it visually, so it's a safer bet for me. Representative Comey, Representative D'Amico, Representative Barry, Representative Rose, Senator Needleman, Representative Slapp, Senator Lesser, Senator Bergstein, Representative Churko, Representative Steinberg, Representative McCarthy-Vahey, Representative Scanlon, Representative Gilchrist, Representative Florin, Representative Palm, Senator Cohen, Representative Daffin, and Representative Elliott and Senator Abrams. I think I got them all. And with that, State Representative Caroline Simmons.
Good morning, everyone. I want to echo the sentiments that have already been said and thank all of the advocates here today with the CT Coalition for Choice, as well as the amazing group of bipartisan legislators standing up with us today, especially the men, because we know women's healthcare issues are family healthcare issues, so thank you to all the men standing with us today. And I also want to especially thank Lieutenant Governor Bicewitz, as well as Attorney General William Tong and Comptroller Kevin London, who've been tremendous champions for women's healthcare issues for many years and have codified a lot of the laws that we have in place to protect those rights in Connecticut. We are here today on this historic day. 46 years ago today, women's privacy and reproductive rights were made legal in the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision. But since that day, there have been numerous efforts that we've all seen across the country at all levels of government to roll back those rights, which is terrifying, and they continue to be vulnerable today. And so we are standing up here today to do everything we can to protect those rights here in Connecticut. And in addition to the terrific bills that have already been mentioned, we'll also be introducing 2 bills that seek to protect women who wish to breastfeed when they return to the workforce. And this is something I'm learning more about now since just having a baby, learning how challenging it can be navigating breast pumps, which Representative Linehan brought up last year. You probably saw it can look like a science experiment. Used to seeing those devices. But the 2 bills we have before us, one has 3 key provisions. The first is it requires employers to make reasonable efforts to provide a private lactation space that is shielded from the public. That language isn't currently in our statute. And the reason for this is because it can be embarrassing if you have to do this with someone in the public seeing, and many of us have heard horror stories from constituents and friends about their workplaces not offering these private spaces. The second provision requires employers to make reasonable efforts to provide access to a refrigerator and an electrical outlet, which of course are key to actually turning on the pumping devices and safely storing express breast milk in a cold storage space so that bacteria doesn't grow and infect the newborn baby. And the third provision of this bill requires support for up to 3 years, which may sound like a long time, but the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that women try to breastfeed for up to 2 to 3 years if they can. And so much research shows that for women who choose to breastfeed, there's so many positive benefits, both to the health of the mother and the child. It reduces the risk of infections, reduces the risk of pneumonia and asthma and a number of other illnesses. And 80% of women that wish to breastfeed start off breastfeeding, and then that percentage significantly drops down to 25% after a couple months. And one of the main reasons is because of difficulties returning to the workforce and the lack of adequate support. So that's the first bill. And the second bill would exempt breastfeeding supplies from the sales tax. Formula is exempt, and we believe that this is a necessary step to help make breastfeeding supplies more affordable. They are protected and covered by insurance under the Affordable Care Act, but of course with all the attempts we've seen to roll back those rights, we want to make sure that right is still protected here in Connecticut. So again, thank you all for being here. Look forward to working together with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to champion these efforts. Thank you.
you, Representative Simmons. And to talk about another piece of legislation, I'd like to introduce Representative Jillian Gilchrist.
Thank you, Senator Flexer, and thank you to all these amazing colleagues. It's particularly special to be up here today. I was the former executive director of Neighborhood Pro-Choice Connecticut and a participant on the Coalition for Choice for years, so to be up here among colleagues now as a legislator supporting reproductive health and access just feels amazing, especially on the day where I'm going to get to make my first vote. So what a wonderful occasion. But here today, as an ally, to talk about another important piece of legislation that I was able to introduce, which would do co-pay-free abortion. And this is an issue of economic security and access to reproductive health care. Connecticut, not only are we a leader here in the state, we're also a leader nationally. And so what we do in the state of Connecticut really sets a tone for what the rest of the country does in terms of reproductive health care. And so although Connecticut is one of the strongest states in the nation for legislation protecting access to abortion, cost barriers still remain for reproductive health care access, particularly those who are covered by high deductible insurance plan. And so this bill would help those folks. I also tend to think I'm in an age range where I have quite a few friends who are struggling to get pregnant. And unfortunately, the unfortunate reality is that sometimes when they do get pregnant, they end up losing that child. And so, oftentimes it's difficult to talk about later term abortion, but in many instances, those are medically necessary. And so the cost to families who are struggling to get pregnant and then lose that child is also tremendous. And so we need to be thinking about all women when we're looking at this proposal. So happy to introduce that, and happy again to be among colleagues who support women's reproductive health care in the state of Connecticut and across this country. Thank you.
And before I introduce three more great leaders on this issue, I do just want to speak briefly on another piece of legislation that Representative Wood mentioned. We are introducing legislation again to make sure that there is truth in advertising with so-called crisis pregnancy centers. There are more crisis pregnancy centers in the state of Connecticut than there are licensed reproductive health care clinics in Connecticut, and this is a serious problem. These organizations often use deceptive practices and make women think that they offer a full range of healthcare services when in reality their sole purpose is to oppose abortion and to make sure a woman does not have full access to the truth about the choices that are in front of her. We want to make sure that this kind of practice is not allowed in the state of Connecticut, and that a woman can have confidence when she's walking into a real healthcare facility that she is going to have available to her the full spectrum of healthcare services. These services are time sensitive, and women don't have time to be lied to. They don't have time to make a mistake and to walk into the wrong kind of center. So we're going to make sure that in Connecticut, these kinds of practices are not allowed, and that women can trust the healthcare facility that they're walking into. With that, I would like to introduce my leader in the state Senate, our great majority leader, Senator Bob Duff.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for being out here today. It's great to see both Democrats and Republicans and men and women, because we know that women's health care, women's reproductive freedom is not a partisan issue, nor is it an issue just for women. It's an issue for all of us. And I know my wife and my mom would be proud to have us here and expect me to be here for this press conference. And so I just want to just lend my support for the bills that are being introduced today, and that we have our public hearings. We continue to be a leader in the nation when it comes to healthcare choice for women, and that we are protecting the rights of women in this nation, in this state, because of what's happening in this nation. We see, again, state after state rolling back protections for women and women's healthcare choice. And we look at that, I think, here in the state of Connecticut, and we see that as something that we would never do, nor would we ever tolerate. So what I think is beneficial for all of us, and really something that we have to do, it's necessary to do, to continue to work to expand women's health care and women's health care rights, and to ensure that we are staying in the leading edge of of the work that's happening, whether it's what Representative Simmons is saying in her bills, whether it's for Representative Gilchrist or others, that we are always at the forefront of these kinds of things, because what happens in the state of Connecticut, other states do look at what we do here, and they want to copy what we're doing, and we don't want to follow the states that are narrowing women's healthcare choices. So again, my thanks to everybody who's here today for all the hard work that you have done already, and the hard work that you will continue to do as the legislative session continues. Thank you, everybody.
And our final two speakers this morning are our great comptroller, Kevin Lembo, who will be followed by our Attorney General, William Tong.
So I feel like it's all been said, but a couple of quick observations. One is I'm happy to play a big part in supporting role in the women that lead us. And I think we, as men, yes, these are new issues, and we are going to work to support these agendas. And I love the fact that we live in Connecticut, a state where we're not going to just hunker down. We're not just going to go into defense mode, where we're not going to be told, no, just hang on to what you got and wait until the next bright day comes. No, we're going to push forward. And so many of these pieces of legislation that have been mentioned are forward-thinking and will keep Connecticut's spot, as Senator Duff has said, as a leader on these issues. And so I'm proud to support that in any way I can. As a data guy and a healthcare guy, I think I've got some information, evidence, and other material that will be helpful to you in this effort. And I look forward to the fight ahead. Thank you very much. Thanks for bringing us all together.
And finally, we're lucky to have a great partner in our Attorney General, William Tong.
Here it comes. It's great to be home here in the LOB, and great to see so many familiar faces, Representative Linehan and Representative Simmons and Senator Flexer and Senator Moore. Thank you so much for your leadership. And for all of my former colleagues and all of our new colleagues, what's really great about this gathering is seeing so many new faces, and so many new faces who are women. And of course, what you see here right now is a physical representation of the firewall to protect women's reproductive rights, healthcare generally, and women's rights and human rights, as the controller said. This is a critical issue that requires all of us, all hands on deck, and it's a partnership. The firewall is a partnership of our state and local leaders, but also our federal partners and our constitutional officers. One of the very first meetings we did in the Attorney General's office over the first few days was on our effort to protect coverage for contraception under the Affordable Care Act. And Connecticut is engaged in that litigation. We won a really important preliminary injunction in federal court, which basically shows that we're going to win that case on the merits and make sure that the Affordable Care Act provides for coverage for contraception here in Connecticut and across the country. We're also fighting hard against the administration in Washington and their effort to impose the gag rule under Title X, which would limit the ability of Planned Parenthood and other healthcare providers to provide counseling to at least 43,000 women in Connecticut last year at 17 different centers at least, and to ensure that people have access to the full range of healthcare and they get counseling on the full range of healthcare, including abortion. So it's a real honor to fight this fight with all of you, and let's get to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Tong, and I want to thank all of my colleagues who are here this morning. And just one more time, I want to give a particular shout out to the chairs of the Insurance Committee, Senator Lesser and Representative Scanlon, and the chairs of the Public Health Committee, Senator Abrams and Representative Steinberg, where many of these new initiatives will start in the process, and we're grateful for their leadership on these issues. And with that, we're happy to take questions.
Can you give us a sense of what's the sweet spot in how you restrict language on the emergency crisis centers as opposed to not infringing on their, how to ensure truth in advertising without infringing on their free speech rights?
That's a really great question, and it is, we have to be very careful about how we draft this legislation so that we can do exactly as you just described and have that balance between making sure we're ensuring that women in Connecticut have truth in the healthcare practices that they're approaching, but also making sure that people's free speech rights are protected. And so what we're looking at is closely modeled after an ordinance from San Francisco, and that's been litigated in federal court and withstood the test there. So we're using a language that's very similar to that with the law that we're proposing for our state.
Was that resolved, that litigation? Has that been?
So it has been successfully litigated in federal court and has withstood that test.
Yeah, well, has the Supreme Court, who I'm not familiar with, so I'm just asking, has it gone to the Supreme Court? Has the Supreme Court refused to hear? I don't know anything about this.
I believe that the Supreme Court declined to take the case, so the federal court ruling stood.
So that was the 9th district?
Yes. Are there other questions?
Hey, Caroline, could you talk a little bit about the current law regarding breastfeeding? It goes back a few years, so what are the limits?
Sure. So, federal law does have basic protections. I believe they were passed in 2011 that protect women's right to breastfeed in the workplace and prevent employers from discriminating against women who wish to breastfeed on their break. And then the Affordable Care Act took that even further and provided additional protections for breastfeeding supplies covered by insurance. And in Connecticut state law, there's two laws that apply. Our state labor law provides protections, and our state's anti-discrimination law provides protections that employers can't discriminate against women who wish to breastfeed.
Representative Gilchrist mentioned late-term abortions, and I'm sorry, I couldn't quite follow what it is you are proposing. What is it you are proposing?
So the bill at hand is to get rid of, to have co-pay-free abortions in the state of Connecticut. And so really breaking it down into medical abortions and then surgical abortions. This bill would significantly impact low-income individuals in the state or folks who have high deductible health care plans. So it's cost prohibitive to be able to get an abortion. And I was talking about the later terms, so there are many families who find out late into their pregnancy that there's an anomaly or that they are going to lose the child after birth or lose the child before they give birth. And so they then have to get a surgical abortion, and that is incredibly expensive. And so this would also impact those families.
Are there any other questions?
Did you guys have a list of
We do.
specifically the bills and
We do.
bill numbers you do?
Well, we don't have numbers yet for all of them
Okay.
because, many of them were proposed last week and they haven't made it through the process yet.
Okay, but you could provide us with something.
Absolutely.
And so these are bills that are going to be, the committee's going to have to vote to draft them.
That's right. They've either been proposed or the committee's agreed to draft them. That's correct.
If I could just ask one final question, the general political question about where do you see Connecticut after 2018 as far as women's health? This group is sizable, it does not represent a majority, although certainly the history in Connecticut is that these bills do enjoy majority support. But can you just give your assessment of where we are in Connecticut after the 28 midterms on these types of issues?
Well, I would say that the history of Connecticut having strong bipartisan support for women's health care is as strong as ever, and that's what we've seen in the 2018 elections. Many of our new colleagues that are standing up here, these are the issues that they ran on, and that they're the reason that they ran for office in the first place and why they were able to gain the support of their voters. And I know that, I don't want to speak for my friends on the other side of the aisle, but Representative Florin and Representative Wood can certainly speak to their long commitment with many of their colleagues on the Republican side for these issues. And I think, as Attorney General Tom said, Connecticut is ready to lead. And as Comptroller Lumbo said, we're not going to just sit back and protect what we have, but we're ready to move things forward and make sure that Connecticut is at the forefront of access to health care for all women in our state.
And what happened last year with the person's pregnancy, Doug? I'm just blanking.
It's the bill got a public hearing in the Public Health Committee, and then it was never brought forward for a vote.
So there's no state law anywhere in the U.S. There's ordinances, but not state laws. Is that correct?
There are ordinances, and there is no state law, to my knowledge.
So this would possibly be a person.
That's correct. Again, an example of Connecticut leading. Thank you all very much.